righty. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for TJ Shanhoff. Please pay no attention to the man behind the screen. All right. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. Welcome to Show Up Chicago. Thank you all for being here. Woo! My name is Maureen Kuhl, and on behalf of my pals at Indivisible Blue Beginning, I am very excited to welcome you all here tonight. Show Up Chicago is a community gathering and political panel show. Whether you are a returner or this is your first time, we're so glad you guys came out. Is this anyone's first time here tonight? Amazing! Oh, this is awesome. Give yourselves a round of applause. Thanks for being here. Also, a very big thank you to the Hideout for hosting us. Please be sure to tip your bartenders and see the bar when needed. So, a lot has happened since I was last on the stage, but most recently, if you haven't heard, Saturday night was the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And President Trump attended for the very first time as president. If you haven't heard, there was a shooting at the dinner. In honor of tonight's topic, the new journalism, I thought I'd dig into less about the event itself and more how it was covered. Because as you can imagine, it was covered. To the people in the room, there's nothing like the rush of danger and the possibility of a Pulitzer all in one evening. The media was quick to cover the event. We saw coverage everywhere, almost immediately, from legacy media to Instagram to Reddit. So in case you can't read, it says Stephen Miller using pregnant wife as human shield. This was actually how I first found out about the shooting. So we just went through the news, but then of course there was the news about the news. Lots of conspiracy theories swirling. So it makes you wonder, what's next, you know? You've got the news about the news. Next we're gonna have the news about the news about the news. And that's why we're here tonight. Our panelists will talk all things media, what we consume and where we consume it, and our basically infinite choices when it comes to where we get our news. So thank you all for being here for this very, very important topic. As always, tonight's panel is being recorded for a podcast and radio show, so time is tight, and so are our microphones. Oops, sorry. Because tonight there is actually another show in here right after this. Rather than doing a formal Q&A for those returners, we usually do it in this room with the panelists at the end of the panel. After the panel, we're going to move into the bar area. So our panelists will be there. We would love to have more discussion and a little bit more of a Q&A out there. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Marge and Tom, and they will introduce our wonderful panelists. I'm so sorry. I think that's all you need from me. I'm Maureen Kuhl. Thank you all so much for being here, and we will get started.
All right. Thank you, Maureen. Welcome again, everyone, to Show Up Chicago. We are a community gathering and political panel show presented monthly at the Hideout. I'm Tom Moss. This is Marge Halpern. We are part of the leadership team for Indivisible Blue Beginning. We called this panel the New Journalism in recognition of the fact that the news and how we tell it, how we consume it, has always been evolving.
That's absolutely true. The hand-wringing over the loss of a great media era is sort of, to me, like the promise of making America great again. Like, neither was really all that great for a lot of people, right? So do we really want the always corporate Chicago Tribune, for example, to have so much power over local policy and even over elections through endorsements, which thankfully, they are not so much doing after the great Gary Johnson debacle. Do we really want to be glued to a new Walter Cronkite's every word? I'm not even sure we want to go back to the time when Siskel and Ebert were so powerful that Gene could rather viciously spoil the ending of Friday the 13th because he was so disgusted by it and aimed to prevent people from watching.
It didn't work.
It didn't work, by the way, but it wasn't very nice. So we're not going to go down that good old days path. We're not too far down it anyway. The legacy media really were gatekeepers, right? So today we have near infinite choice in what we consume for news. Is that a blessing? It's a blessing and a curse, I would say. And our goal tonight is to focus on the current landscape and all the options, national and local.
And we have two guests tonight who are perfectly matched for this conversation. Steve Held, over here on the far right, is a Chicago, yes, fan club in attendance, Steve, is a Chicago-based investigative journalist and co-founder of Unraveled, an independent outlet focused on policing, extremism, and government accountability, published at unraveledpress.com, and deserves all of the accolades that you're giving him. He first gained attention around 2017 through public records work exposing vulnerabilities in the interstate cross-check voter system. Oh, those were the good old days, huh, Steve? Which helped spur federal scrutiny and litigation. Many outlets, including Wired Magazine, have picked up reporting from Steve and his colleagues. Congratulations on that. Mark Jacob is a veteran Chicago journalist and editor, formerly Metro editor at the Chicago Tribune and Sunday editor at the Chicago Sun-Times. He writes the... Mark, your fan club in attendance as well. Fantastic. He writes the Substack newsletter, Stop the Presses. It is Substack, is that right?
Yeah, it's on Substack.
Which critiques American journalism, particularly how media practices can enable misinformation and political extremism. And if I could just ask maybe one question. My wife always asks me, what is Substack? And I say, it's a platform. And she says, what is a platform? So when people ask you, what is Substack and what you do, how do you describe it?
I mean, it is a publishing platform. It's a email newsletter platform. But they also are trying to expand into being more of a social media platform as well, where people can do what they would do on Blue Sky and on X and on Facebook as well. But the main thing that Substack is trying to do is allow people to kind of build their own brands. Write in effect what used to be called a blog, and it's an email newsletter, and it gets mailed out to people. And one of the magical things about that, as far as the news business, is that instead of, in social media, you put your stuff out there and people get to it fairly randomly or through algorithms. But with email newsletters, the people who are receiving your content have requested it. They've asked for it, so they trust it. It is a trusted entry into their inbox. And for that reason, it gets a higher open rate than a lot of things, and it has more impact.
So we want to start by talking about the state of what we used to call mainstream media, but it's not so much in the mainstream anymore, as a lot of it is faltering and disappearing. You write regularly, Mark, about the ways that the legacy media folks failed to do their job and even compromise their independence or integrity. Your column today is excellent. Those who have not read it should look it up, Stop the Presses, because you make the case that the White House Correspondents' Dinner that Maureen was just talking about is a prime example of how the media compromises itself. You thought that even before this weekend's debacle. Tell us a little bit about what makes you uncomfortable.
Well, for years I've been saying that the White House Correspondents' Dinner is an embarrassing it's an embarrassing event that makes journalism seem untrustworthy. Here you have the politicians and the media clinking champagne glasses, and these are the people that the media is supposed to be holding to account. And so it just creates this, whether it's true, whether they're actually in bed together, it makes them look like they're in bed together. So at the very best case scenario is that they look awful, and the very worst case scenario is that they are awful. That they're in cahoots, as Carl Sandburg liked to say, and it's just not necessary to have this embarrassing episode. And in my newsletter today was pointing out that the Saturday shooting actually worked to Trump's advantage, because you immediately had the CBS News reporter Jang who is the head of the Correspondents Association, talking about how she and Trump had a discussion afterward about how unifying the event was and how it just showed unity. And it just drove me crazy, because it's not the job of the journalists to create unity with the politicians they're covering. It's their job to seek out the truth, and that does not usually involve becoming friends with the people you're covering. And it's so I went on that kind of rant, basically.
It was pretty legit. Yeah, made sense to me. Steve, when are you having dinner with Mayor Johnson?
Yeah, right. Well, I was actually trying to think of that analogy of like, how absurd would it seem if all of the city's, city hall press held a banquet to celebrate Mayor Johnson and kind of hobnob. And I'm sure, outside of that, there's social circles, but like to hold an event like that, yeah, it just undermines everybody's credibility involved.
And it isn't supposed to be an event to celebrate the president. It was
Well-
actually an event to mock the president, but because it's Trump, they agreed to stop the roasting and have a whole different event. So it was off on the wrong
It was
path.
framed as kind of honoring him in some way, and,
Yeah.
and it's like the guy who calls them the enemy of the people and attacks them constantly. And then even like I watched a few minutes of 60 Minutes last night,
Yeah.
where Trump just attacked I think it was Nora O'Donnell.
Nora O'Donnell, yeah.
Yeah, and just attacked her and said she was despicable and all these things for reading back quotes. And it's like all the headlines right after that, as Mark said, were like unity, and Trump took a different tone. They love running the different tone story every time.
Yeah, how many times has he taken a different tone?
I think
For about 3 hours,
Yeah.
and then it's just back to the old tone.
Yeah.
And it's not just, just to be really clear, it's not just that the Trump regime is insulting journalists. It is making their jobs harder. It's lying to them every day. It's trying to mislead them. It's punishing them for calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of Mexico. It is harassing them in one way after another. It's spying on them.
lawsuits.
It's raiding their homes. I mean, so it's way beyond talk. This is a out of control authoritarian regime that is trying to harass journalists and kill the First Amendment. It's really what's happening.
And if you want to know all the things he's called the media, I think it is also your column that has a very complete list of all the names.
With
and
links. Yeah, with
and
links.
right.
Despicable, yeah,
Thank you.
disgusting,
Piggy.
the worst people we've ever
My favorite,
seen,
Piggy.
yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
Putin's game. It's Orban's game. So you, Mark, were not at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
Oh, I was there. I was just clinking glasses with him.
Steve was not.
We had a blast.
But
No, I wasn't.
but Aaron Parnas, the Substack journalist, I guess we'll call him, was not there. I want to say Seth MacFarlane. We made that mistake the other day, right? Steve Scott MacFarlane, who just left CBS, right? It was not there. So what is the right term for who was there? Is it legacy media? Is it traditional media? Is it, I prefer corporate media?
I was going to say collaborator, but
Yeah, well, clearly, but I mean, I think that kind of goes into the mix too.
I think it's a social circle in Washington. I mean, that's the way. There's a kind of a journalism sickness in Washington, in my opinion, because I just feel like I think they're there to hobnob. They're there for their career. They're not there to celebrate the First Amendment. That's not what's bringing them. What's bringing them is how good they think they look in their dresses and their tuxes. And
While they're under the table.
Well,
in this
right.
case. In this case. But
except for Salad Guy. Did you see that one guy?
no, oh yeah, who's still eating.
Right, he was
I'm
still
not
eating.
done. And then there were all those who grabbed the bottles of wine and off on their way out. But we don't want to spend we don't want to spend too much time on the dinner, except that it strikes me this is the conversation is the foundation of why Steve and others are independent journalists. Is that the gist of it, Steve? Because we had local journalists covering ICE and DHS, but you found a niche. Tell us how you got started.
well, yeah. So to back up a little bit, so Raven Geary, my business partner, reporting partner, is in the back of the room there. We founded we both had been doing some independent journalism on our own and started working together probably in 21. We met on Twitter back before it turned into the Nazi site. But we started collaborating then, and then in 2024 we thought, let's do this for real. We had been reporting kind of under kind of anonymously on Twitter and just putting stuff out on social media. And I was like, let's create a real publication and professionalize our work a bit. And we had slightly different interests, but in that Venn diagram, like policing was something that we were both looking at, and just questioning the narratives of policing. Like so many times, the initial report is always from the police perspective. That's what gets out there in the media. So they always get to set the narrative, and then it's maybe eventually more comes out and you back out of it. But so we wanted to focus on investigative reporting and looking into policing, and then kind of the whole ecosystem of multiple layers of accountability we have here in Chicago, and looking at that system holistically. Just challenging that narrative. And what we didn't know in October 2024, when we formed this, the election was right after that. It wasn't a complete surprise that Trump won, but we had a very small window to actually do what we had planned to do. And then the super cops showed up. And we started going to immigration court in May 25. So we were the first reporters that were out there on the ground. We were real-time reporting what was happening in immigration court. Like every single day, ICE agents were coming in. They were dismissing cases of immigrants who, by definition of being there in court, were following the process, right? These were not criminals. These were not people who were on the run or they couldn't find. They're showing up for their court cases, sometimes in suits. A lot of, there was one man I saw actually taken by ICE who was in a full, suit and had an attorney there and everything, and they still just argued with, well, they didn't really argue with his attorney. They just told him to move and took this man. And so then it escalated. They were in immigration court for a few weeks, protesters. I'll give a shout out to all the protesters that were there, because there weren't a lot. On the biggest day, there were probably 30, I don't know, maybe. But they successfully shut that avenue down for ICE to take people. They only actually took people out of immigration court, as far as I know, for about 3 weeks. It was about 3.5 weeks. And there was no longer, they had kind of like raised the cost of them. It was just shooting fish in a barrel, basically, going to court. They could just, all they cared about was their quota and their numbers, so they could just go in and grab people and probably get a dozen people a day. And then once protesters kind of increased that cost of going in and taking people, then they went back to kind of their, quick strike tactics that we see out in the neighborhood. And then Border Patrol showed up. And so that was a whole, we were at Broadview probably over the summer, before the big protests started. Again, we were out in Broadview when, there were days we were out there where there were like 2 protesters, 6, and they still were standing up to these guys and just getting throttled. And, we stayed on it, and then eventually, as more people showed up, then I think, we're putting it out there, which, we're a little bit kind of the early warning bell for a lot of media in the city, is like, well, now we actually, we're putting out there what was kind of invisible, to the major media outlets. And I think that as more people came, and then more media outlets came out and started reporting on it.
So you say putting it out there. What does that mean exactly? Where do you put it, and how did that get started?
That is a good question. Thank you. So we are primarily on Blue Sky. So a lot of our reporting, so we left Twitter. We had a pretty decent following on Twitter, but at some point we had to just abandon it. It was just a mess.
Were they followers or were they trolls or a little of both?
Well, I mean, we had some, certainly a group of core followers who then, many of whom followed us over to Blue Sky. But yeah, it was a lot of people left, but we just had to abandon that. And actually the first thing that turned us on to Blue Sky was realizing that showed us how much Twitter was throttling our content, right? Because we would post stories or videos or whatever, and wouldn't get that much traction, and it was declining after Elon took over. It was just kept declining, and I even saw this. I saw it the most with the Tribe. So the Tribe is a local independent Black-owned outlet, and I followed them on Twitter, but I never saw their content, and I think I was just like, oh, they're like we don't put out, we're not a daily, we don't put out news stories every day, we might have I think we've gone from like a story a month to like maybe a story or two a week, and we keep accelerating that, but we started posting on Blue Sky, and the Tribe moved over. And suddenly I started seeing all these great stories from the Tribe, and we had like 1/10 of the following when we moved to Blue Sky, but we're getting like 2 or 3 times the interaction,
So people are
So
seeing you.
it was the algorithm. Like Blue Sky doesn't have an algorithm. You follow them, it's chronological. You're gonna see the content, where Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all the other platforms, it's crazy to see how much they will suppress certain content if it's about ICE or Border Patrol or police
Well,
violence.
that's why we use pictures of our puppies instead of pictures of ICE action when we want people to read something. If you haven't figured that out yet, folks, that tip is free. So Robert Reich has...
Like and subscribe.
Right. Robert Reich, you can find me on Blue Sky too. Robert Reich has posted this list that follows exactly what you're talking about. The richest man owns X. The second and fourth richest men control Google. The third richest man owns Washington Post. The fifth owns Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. And now the sixth richest could soon take over both Paramount and Warner Brothers, which will send CNN the way of CBS, which he already owns. So that's where we're headed, right? Why, Mark, at some point I think I'd just stop paying attention to any of them. That's not maybe a good solution.
Well, to me, this is the central problem is corporate media, and the fact that you have people owning really important news outlets, or news outlets that used to be really important, like the Washington Post, and they don't care about the Washington Post. In effect, Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post and is using it as leverage with Trump. That if he keeps the opinion side very pro-Trump, which he has done, then Trump will leave Bezos alone on his other more important businesses like Amazon and Blue Origin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in effect, the Washington Post becomes this kind of sacrificial lamb for all of Bezos' other businesses. And you have the same thing with the Ellison family with CBS, and unfortunately probably CNN soon, is that those are going to be small parts of their business. And the Trump administration clearly is willing to squeeze businesses if he doesn't like what they're doing. So they're in effect they're buying protection by having news outlets that are subservient to the regime. And so that makes it really, really bad. There are some exceptions, and I'd like to call them out. The Guardian. Now isn't it a sad statement that the most reliable source for American politics news is based in the UK? Yeah, really.
Well, it's not unrelated that the UK is where people who have Epstein connections are being held accountable.
That's right.
And not here. And Ellison, this was overshadowed by the Correspondents' Dinner, but I believe it was Friday night that David Ellison, who is trying to take over CNN and build this, that's who we're talking about, he held a dinner for Trump on Friday night. Did I read that in your column too?
No, but that's right.
I read another one. There are others that I read, not just yours. But we, sorry to tell you. But yeah, so, and he did it in that building that used to be the Institute of Peace before Trump shut it down. So they had a dinner Friday night, a gala that was honoring Trump with some other kind of fake award in the government building that we all pay for, in a way to really seal the deal on taking over CNN and the whole group.
And then that's one of those buildings that's been renamed. That's the Trump Institute of Peace now.
Right.
Does this look more like a dictatorship than anything else when you see that kind of crap happening? When you see giant posters of Trump in front of government agencies? I mean, it's madness. You see the Kennedy Center become the Trump Kennedy Center. This is not normal. And one of the things that I think that where media has really gone wrong is that they've normalized this. They've acted like, well, this is just the way things are. This is badly abnormal. This is not to be accepted. This is not the country that we are supposed to have. And for the news media to just sane wash it and normalize it and not tell us no, there's actually the Constitution's supposed to work like this. For them not to explain that, instead of just saying that whatever Trump wants to do is fine, it's a terrible disservice, and it's why the media crisis in this country is a big part of the political crisis.
Not going to dispute anything you've said, except I guess I do want to note that I think that the news media is not monolithic.
Right.
You're talking when I heard you talking about the media, you were talking about the corporate media, the
Right.
CNN, the Washington Post. We could go on. You mentioned the Guardian as a good resource. The Atlantic is doing great work.
Yeah.
Wired magazine is doing work, and Steve Held is doing great work.
Right.
So I mean, one factor in this evolution of fracturing of news is that there is no Walter Cronkite. There is nobody that is going to speak truth to power, that's going to begin the process of ending the Vietnam War. That entity doesn't exist anymore. And I've also wondered, this is my little soapbox that I crawl on occasionally, that the idea of objective news is sort of an accident of late capitalism and the 20th century mass media. It didn't exist before that, and I think we're seeing it fracture now, which is a long way to get around to the question I want to ask you. If not the corporate media, where do we get our news? And maybe more specifically, where do you get your news?
Well, The Guardian and Wired were a couple of the ones. Al Jazeera, there are a lot of outlets that have, but I'm actually, when you mentioned objectivity in reporting, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something actually when Raven and I first started talking about starting this, I mean, we had been online, we had been social media, we're not shy about our opinions. We can be, we're trying to tone it down a little bit. We can be a little snarky on social media at times, but we have a perspective on this, and I know that that's kind of frowned upon, right, in corporate media. And so I actually read a book that was called A View from Somewhere by Lewis Raven Wallace, that I recommend checking out, that goes into what Tom alluded to, kind of the whole history of newspapers in America really started out as completely partisan papers funded by political parties. And then
And pamphleteers before that.
Yeah, and pamphleteer, and so it's really a more modern development of corporations owning newspapers and having to sell advertising that appeals to a broader audience. And so, and also it's a form of, this is actually the main point of the book, it's a form of gatekeeping on perspectives. So you read that Robert Reich list of all of the billionaires. Well, besides being billionaires, they're all white men, right? And you
We
look
noticed.
you look at the whole media landscape, and it's dominated. And as I was thinking about this coming up, thinking about Ida B. Wells reporting on lynchings, and no white dude was going to report on that in like 1890. And you just get all these there's so many voices and perspectives that you don't hear in media now that is actually, and it's not just some like woke, DEI thing that now has been somehow diversity has been labeled as this negative thing, but it's like we truly are like diminished as a society that we don't have as many of those voices and perspectives that can really connect with different communities and tell those stories. And I think, it's also not lost upon us that, Raven and I are both white. This room, if you look around, and it doesn't mean, we don't have valid opinions on all this, but, I think for us, it means, we have to try harder to engage. For now, we only have a budget for occasional freelancers, but to try and, broaden our reach beyond just our perspectives. And
But actually, the problem was that for so many years, the news business, especially in Chicago, didn't view that as a problem. It was just not considered that it was a problem that you didn't have any idea what was happening on the Black South Side if you were a newspaper editor downtown. It was a scandal, the fact that how much was not known. I write history books, and so I read a lot of archives, and the Chicago Tribune did not know what was happening. They didn't know anything about all the great stuff that was happening in parts of town that were not white. It's incredibly embarrassing. I wrote a book about Abe Saperstein, who founded the Harlem Globetrotters, which they're not from Harlem, they're from Chicago. And the Chicago Tribune thought they were from Seattle. I found a news clip where they thought they didn't even know that a famous basketball team that was from Chicago was from Chicago. The level of ignorance and studied ignorance that you don't want to know, is really embarrassing. And so that goes back to what you were asking about objectivity. If you think that that in some office downtown, surrounded by white people in a newsroom, you're going to be able to decide what's really important to cover in a city like Chicago, you're never going to get it right.
Well, it's just going back to the issue of corporate media. They weren't also probably selling many papers in those areas.
Well, they were, because they weren't covering them,
Right, chicken and egg, I
why
guess.
would you buy it? I wouldn't if you lived there, yeah. Plus the Defender was really great in those years also.
It just seems to me that a fundamental of journalism is you have to know what you don't know.
Right.
And if you aren't curious to find out what you don't know, what kind of a journalist are you?
Well, a friend of mine once said that journalists don't need to know anything. They just need to know how to find the people who do. And I thought that was one of the smartest things I've ever heard. It's really true because you're not really expected to know things as journalists. You're just supposed to know how to find them out.
Right. And I can tell you when that situation changed. I know exactly when, because I was covering City Hall when Harold Washington became mayor. And suddenly we're all on the South Side. And there was a reporter, Larry Langford, who was at MAQ at the time, I think, and he used to tease those of us who were white. When we'd come, he'd say, "Oh, you punched yourself a Cermak card today, didn't you?" Guilty as charged. We learned the whole thing. Harold Washington took us all over the South Side. It was kind of a part of it. But
Before we go to the question I actually asked.
I realized I didn't actually answer your question.
Was where do you get your news?
Yeah. Oh, you want me to actually? Tom holding my feet to the fire. Like
I don't know anything except.
Yeah. I'm a doom scroller on social media, so I get a lot of news just scrolling through Blue Sky.
But you've curated those sources for you.
Yeah, right. So, I follow other journalists. I don't, and I do like that Blue Sky doesn't have the algorithm, so I'm just seeing stuff from people I've followed, or if there are people that I don't follow who pop up too much, I can just mute them so I can silence those voices, because there's still, there's disinformation everywhere, right? So you do have to be careful and thoughtful, and we all, there's always that one thing that you see and just right away your adrenaline spikes and you can't believe that this happened, and then sometimes you take a beat and it's like, wait, is what I'm looking at actually real, and look into it. And so we try to be you just have to be, I mean, like, we're journalists, so we have to be extra careful about anything we're retweeting, putting out there. But, you know, everybody needs to question what they're seeing. I think, I mean, I follow all the local media to know what's going on. There's pretty much everybody. You know, small independent outlets from, I mean, I'm following the Tribune and the Sun-Times to see what's going on in the Block Club, but also like Injustice Watch. I really like Bolt's magazine, if you follow them on like election issues.
Southside Weekly?
Southside Weekly, yeah.
I mean,
Mark,
The
what's
Tribe.
What's
Yeah.
what's
well,
your
that,
list?
I, you know,
The
I
Reader, the Reader, Sean from The Reader's in
Yeah,
the
The
room. I gotta
Reader,
give The Reader
right.
a shout out.
You know, that's the thing. There are a lot of smaller outlets that are doing a great job, and I mean it's different now than it used to be. It used to be really easy. You'd get some big wadded up piece of paper on your front step, and you'd read it, and you'd think you knew everything. And now you do have to go to get real Chicago news. You better be looking at about 10 or 12 different things, you know, over the course of a week or something. I like Eric Zorn's newsletter. I look at that all the time. I like Chicago Public Square, which is a newsletter, kind of an aggregation that Charlie Meyerson does. That's actually really good because in like one sentence, he summarizes a story, and he'll summarize like 25 stories in each newsletter. And so it's a real time-saving thing, and if you find something you like, you just go to the link. And and the fact that there's not giant behemoths anymore who are controlling the news in Chicago is not a bad thing. I mean, in a lot of ways, it makes things better. There's a better attitude in Chicago journalism now than there used to be. I worked for the Sun-Times at one point and the Tribune at another point, and we wanted to strangle the other all the time. We hated them, and we wanted to beat them and embarrass them and all this other stuff. There's not that attitude anymore, and it's good. There's much more of an attitude, and you see this, of collaboration between news outlets. And you really saw that with Operation Midway Blitz, where you saw, you know, one of your folks, you or somebody else would be at a scene, somebody else would be at another scene, some other outlet would be at another scene, and everyone would be sharing information. And it made for better coverage, and it meant that even though the two major papers in Chicago, I think, are greatly diminished staff-wise, you just can't deny that. And I was worried that when, you know, if ICE and Border Patrol came and wreaked its terrorism here in Chicago, that they would not be covered right. But it was covered really well, and it was, and all the journalists in Chicago made the right decision to drop other less important things and concentrate on that and collaborate with each other and share information, and they did the right thing. And so I don't think it would have been covered better if you'd had the giant Tribune and the giant Sun-Times and none of these other smaller outlets.
Let's talk about disinformation for a minute, because Steve brought it up, and we've been talking in circles a little around it. And I can remember when at one point the rise of international terrorists led some pundits to suggest the definition of superpowers had changed. It wasn't the United States and Russia, but any individual could be a superpower by virtue of some terrorist activity that affected the whole world. I'm starting to sound like I'm describing our president, but I'm not. But isn't that what an independent journalist now becomes? They're much more powerful. The news can come from anywhere or anyone who does the right research. I'm kind of with you, Mark. I think that's a good thing and a good development, and I would think we'd like more Steve and Ravens to come out and tell us what they're finding. Isn't that the climate that makes that possible?
Yeah, I mean, it's good. I think it's good and bad, you know, that we have, it's awesome that, you know, we have independent journalists that are out there and are covering these things that aren't covered and covering them in a way that aren't necessarily covered by corporate media. But it's also, you know, incredibly fractured environment. Like it's way more work, I think, as a news consumer to start to identify who are all these different people, who do I trust and who don't I trust. And yeah, I think it makes it, it's more powerful. Like certainly, like Raven and I, you know, were able to get our news out there and read at least by some, you know, for us, decent sized audience, but then also know if it's, impactful, a lot of times other media outlets will then pick that up and do a follow-up or do their own story about it or something too. So it gets out there, but you can feel like you're screaming into the void a lot as we do this, and especially when you're on platforms that are like suppressing your content, things like that. So yeah, I think it's a unique time that before the internet we couldn't have done what we're doing, but it's also, there is just so much noise and so much fragmentation right now, which, like you said, there are benefits of fragmentation, but yeah, it's just hard. And it's like, what do you have to subscribe to 42 different newsletters and outlets and get through paywalls, and it's just, I think, it's really hard to navigate as a consumer. And I guess to divert a little bit, like Mark and I were talking before this about thinking about journalism as like a public good, and like our libraries or things like that, I don't know, it's just lost. Like, it really, I mean, if the Trump era hasn't highlighted how important journalism is to just a functioning democracy, I don't know what will. But it's like, it's so hard for journalists out there today to survive. I mean, independent journalists, every independent journalist you follow, if that is I'm fortunate enough that my wife has a great job. My wife of 23 years next month, and she fully supports this work. But without that, it's really, really challenging for independent journalists to go out. Many of them are working another job and do this and build an audience and make any kind of money from it, and ideally start making more money so that they can do more of this, what they really like to do. And so yeah, it's a challenge.
Well, and a lot of the independent outlets in Chicago they get grants from foundations. And Chicago's got a lot of foundations with a lot of money. The real problem, or the biggest problem in local journalism nationwide, is in rural areas, and areas that are very ill-served, don't have millionaires living there or billionaires. And and a lot of them are news deserts. I used to work at the Manila Local News Initiative, and we were studying that, and how, and downstate Illinois got a lot of news deserts. Those folks, they may have 1 or 0 working journalists in the county,
And they might work for Sinclair.
well, right, exactly. So I mean, so if you think the journalism situation, the local news situation is bad in Chicago, it's much worse in a lot of other places.
Yeah, I grew up in a tiny town in the middle of Illinois. We had, growing up, the Clinton Journal and Public and the Observer across the square, published weekly, and I was in it maybe once a week or so. But it doesn't exist anymore. And I think, my guess is, maybe you'll correct me, but people in that region now are getting their news likely from their local news, their micro-local news, from Facebook. From word of mouth.
Yeah, but Facebook doesn't produce news.
No.
I mean, so where are they really getting it?
Well, I mean, it's what are we calling news? So their information about what's going on in the community, as filtered or as unfiltered as it might be, as maybe coming from their friends, that's where they're learning about what's going on in the community. Yeah.
So there is no filter for disinformation or conspiracy theories are now.
Well, and it
rampant.
might just be content put out by their local government or their local police or other entities that they're just reading, and nobody's like questioning what's really happening there.
Well, that's what they find, that in news deserts, the government, fewer people vote, the governments take on more debt, and I mean, there are just a lot of metrics that show that when local news disappears, government works worse. And so it's super important for this to happen, and we're in the middle of the crisis. It hasn't been solved. I mean, in Chicago, there have been foundations that have come to the rescue, and there have been a lot of people who have given money. You get donations from folks, right?
We are 100% reader supported, no paywall, no ads.
Which is the way it should be. When you hit a paywall, you're not going to come back mostly. So that's the way it should be, but it's tough to be that way. To be, are you a nonprofit?
that's a whole other story. But no, we're not. We're not.
Yeah, there are a lot of different categories. Public benefit corporation. Anyway, it's real complicated.
One more question about where people get their news. There's been a lot of polls and reporting about people getting their news from late night, from Colbert, from Jon Stewart, from the usual suspects. For example, a recent Colbert segment clearly featured the first time the audience had heard that Pete Hegseth had quoted Pulp Fiction and not the Bible.
Right.
So, which had already been out for like 24 hours. So I guess the question, maybe this is kind of dovetailing on the previous one too. Should we be wringing our hands about that? Does it mean what we think it means? I guess what do you make of that? It's not a new claim. It's been with us for at least 20 years that I remember.
You mean the claim that people aren't paying attention?
Well, people get their news from what we in this room up here might think of as entertainment outlets as opposed to news outlets.
Boy, as long as they get it from someplace. I that's my attitude about it. My wife and I have had a years-long debate about this, where she says that it diminishes the importance of what's going on and makes people think that it's all just funny stuff and that it's not serious. But I think that any way you can get people this information and show them what's happening is a good thing. So, and also, we're going to go nuts if we don't laugh sometimes. I mean, really, these are tough times, and realists know how bad they are. But you know what? I try to look at some paintings every now and then, and listen to music while I'm washing the dishes. I mean, you got to just break away from it sometimes because because it's really grim, and we got to survive this.
But the reach of late night news is serious enough that Trump is trying to shut them all down.
Yeah.
Right.
So it must mean
he was
something.
attacking Kimmel today, I think, because he made some comment about Melania, widow at the White House Correspondents' Dinner before the dinner, and I didn't actually see it.
Yeah,
I assume it was a joke about his health.
He said that she had the glow of a widow.
The glow of a widow.
A widow in waiting, I think
But now,
he said.
but now they're trying to weaponize this in all sorts of ways, and that's one of them.
Well, yes, they are trying to tell you what television shows you're allowed to watch.
Yeah.
They clearly are doing that and they're actually succeeding with Colbert. I think if it didn't have an impact, they wouldn't try to shut it down.
I think that's true. So if you were advising, let's put it directly, you're advising the president, maybe you are elected the next president, because things can happen, and you're in charge of fixing as the next president, that is, the one who follows this mess, to be clear. You're in charge of fixing this. What are 3 things that you would try to do as soon as possible?
Wait, fixing what? Like
This-
everything?
The media, the media, the distrust of the media, the fractured landscape, the corporate takeover of more media. What would be the first 3 things that you would think should be addressed?
I don't know. I don't think the president. I guess I would question
President's
the
doing it now.
president's. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that the president is like who I would like lobby to change things. I mean, I think, well, not about journalism, but I really think in the next couple elections, it really just needs to be about accountability, people, holding people accountable, and undoing as much damage as possible. As far as the media in that landscape, I mean, I think it's more on a local, like, if you're gonna think about media as like a public good, like I said, we were talking about this before, but we've also seen how they can just turn off the spigot of funding, like Trump just, they did with all sorts of nonprofits. So I don't think that should be at a federal level. I guess I don't know how that should work, but I guess I would dispute whether the president's the right point to try and fix media, and that he should stop attacking media, I guess, and trying to villainize them and arresting them, that should stop. But as far as all the other problems about corporate media and profit motivations and capitalism, all that, that's just bigger questions.
Yeah, but you do have the president, the administration does have the ability to to actually enforce antitrust laws and to keep these giant corporations from becoming even gianter. You know, I mean, there's, you know, this Ellison thing is outrageous. The fact that you would have somebody who just grabbed CBS also being able to grab CNN, and you have also this, you know, there's another deal with Nexstar, who owns WGN. They're trying to acquire Tegna, which is another local news chain. And that chain, if that acquisition happens, they will have a footprint in 80% of the country. And that's way higher than is allowed under the law now, but of course the FCC can make an exception. And they will, because Nexstar is leaning right. And so you have, so just number one, enforce antitrust laws would be nice. Stop lying. I mean, just as a regular policy of the government, stop lying, because they're not, it's not like they just don't quite understand what's going on. This is a government that is systematically lying to us about everything important that's going on. And that could stop on day one. That's a day one thing you could actually do. And you know, the other thing is there ought to be some way to make it easier for people to get into the news business. I mean, whether you do it with tax breaks, make it easier for nonprofits to start, there ought to be a way to really try to, I mean, there are a lot of ways now to make it real easy for the Ellison family to buy up media. There ought to be a way that the government can figure out to get regular people or just mildly rich people into the news business. I mean, there ought to be some innovation there, I think.
I wonder if the corporate media, the breakdown that we've been talking about, that predates Trump, though. I mean, it was in decline for years before Trump took a hatchet to it. So is this something that is an evolutionary process of economics and capitalism and blah blah blah? Is it something that we should be, I mean, obviously concerned about the effect of, but is there? I mean, I guess, okay, let me phrase it this way. Is the future of journalism fixing what Trump has broken, or is it in Substack? Is it in Unraveled? Is it in smaller independent journals? For instance, you were talking about the Tribune. I don't follow the Tribune on Blue Sky, but I follow Greg Pratt.
Well, I mean, it is true that in this era of journalism, every reporter has become a brand. And I used to tell them that. I used to say, you know, the internet's here, you're going to have to make your own brand. And it makes it harder when every reporter or every small news outlet is a separate case. And, you know, I mean, really, there used to be people who read the Tribune their entire life, or the Sun-Times, and they knew what they were going to get, and they weren't going to be surprised that often. And they knew what to believe and what not to believe, and they didn't really have to memorize the reporters' names. But now you kind of do, and it just makes it harder. The truth is that don't you agree that the audience has got to work harder now than they ever had?
That's what, yeah. I mean, this is before I got into this. You know, I'd read the news, and I'd read the Tribune. I couldn't tell you who was on the byline in most cases, but now it's, I mean, partly because I'm in this industry now, but yeah, I think because of the brand building and who do you trust it's kind of less even like the outlet and like the reporter themselves. Like, do I know? I kind of discerned maybe a certain tilt in reporting from this reporter or that reporter, and yeah. But to kind of both your questions about like earlier the president and just how would you fix this? Like, to go way out there, I would bring up like universal basic income would fix so many problems. I mean, it would just improve society in so many different ways, I think, where like I mentioned, freelancers now, you just don't have, many freelancers do not have the time to do what they want to do because they're too busy trying to make money to pay rent and buy food, and just they don't necessarily have like health insurance. I mean, get into health. We won't get into healthcare, but like, there's so many other things that are missing that, it would promote like the arts and so many other different things. But I think journalism kind of fits in that same category of being able to support people to actually get into that work and build up that experience and learn. And, you know, I don't know if we can do more like apprenticeships or things like that to kind of teach people, you know, new freelancers or newer journalists, like get into the
You could
the
also,
industry.
you know, restore the funding to public media, to radio and television, and expand it. And you know, I'm telling you, you know, you look at the PBS NewsHour, it's not leaning left or right. It's reporting factual news really carefully. You know, you know, and I'm always looking for biases one way or the other, and I don't see it in there. I mean, there is a way to do news that's helpful to people that isn't a spin, and they ought to do it. And let's remember that journalism is one of the few occupations that's specifically mentioned in the Constitution. I mean, the right to a free press.
That's the one before the Second Amendment, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, which means it's way more important than guns, and can be more dangerous than guns if not handled correctly. And you know, so it's a public good. It's back what we were talking about. There's a place for government to make sure that journalism is informing people about, and I like to look at it really on the basic level, which is journalism's job is to warn people about threats to their safety and well-being, and to tell them how to make their lives better. And that's what they're failing to do now with Trump, because he's threatening their safety and well-being. And so there's really a place for journalism in public policy. It's not, and right now what we've had is this situation where whatever happens in this Wild West capitalist system is just fine, and it's causing wreckage in journalism.
I think you're both now talking about some of these real root causes. I thought you were going to say, instead of basic income, public education, because that would help fix this.
Well,
as
that
well,
and just
wouldn't it?
media literacy. Like I've read,
Yes.
I mean, there are other nations like in Europe that have like K through 12 media literacy programs, and I don't know what percentage of like the CPS education focuses on media literacy. But
Illinois has a media literacy curriculum.
I did
don't
look
know
into
how
it a
many
little
schools
bit. I
use
don't know how. I don't know like how spread throughout like the entire K through 12. Like it should be a consistent part of education all the way through. I don't know that it's that, and that's what some other countries are doing that have seen just massive improvements, and you know, people being able to discern as they grow up. Like teach folks now how to discern, and even as the platform or the channel or the means of distribution changes, what doesn't change is, you know, figuring. I mean, like AI. We didn't even touch on AI.
We thought about it,
like,
but no.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
another show.
you've like the some of these problems, like those change, but still those same basic skills of like interrogating what you're seeing and who's it from and telltale signs of something being fake. Like everybody should have that drilled into their head.
We did a panel with the leaders of the Illinois Media Literacy Commission a while ago. Maybe we should bring them back. We have less time than I wish we had, but we do want to close by asking you, what can each of us do? What would you advise us to do? Change subscriptions, cancel subscriptions. We hate to do that because of the Greg Pratts of this world, and people who are doing really good reporting at challenging environments. Do we boycott advertisers? There are a lot of ideas. What are your top 2 or 3?
Well, pay for news, for one thing. I mean, it's really worth it, and often you get what you pay for. I mean, there's exceptions like The Guardian and Associated Press, but mostly the best news is behind paywalls, unfortunately, and that means that poor people don't get it. But pay for it if you can. And also, denounce bad news. I mean, get loud. Get on social media and say, this is a stupid story that misses the point entirely. That's what I do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say the same. You know, pay for news, and if you donate to Unraveled if you'd like. But we I just forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, pay for news, and like if there's somebody that's doing good work, I mean, getting back to people working second jobs and whatever, the more that you can support somebody that's doing reporting that you like, the more of that reporting that you're going to get, whether it frees up their time to do it, or whether in our case, like we have a small budget now that we can spend on freelancers to help get more people engaged and help work with other folks. So yeah, it's unfortunately, a lot of it comes down to money. And yeah, just talking to your neighbors and community and sharing news, sharing sources that you trust, and talking about it. Yeah.
We could talk all night. This has been really fantastic. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our broadcast portion of the show. So let me do a quick outro, and then we'll reconvene outside. Show Up Chicago is hosted by Blue Beginning, chapter of Indivisible Chicago, as well as our friends here at the Hideout. If you or your friends were not here tonight, want to rewatch or watch this show, you'll find it on YouTube. Just search for Blue Beginning. Special thanks to all the staff here at the Hideout and tonight's sound engineer, Brooks Hannon. Thanks, Brooks. John Freeberg manages our broadcasting and our recording. Thanks to Lewis University for tech support. Thanks to WCPT for broadcasting our show, 7 p.m. the following Sunday. Thanks to the Blue Beginning team, who in addition to Marge and me, includes Chloe Madvig, Maureen Kuhl, Nick Rabkin, and Mike Lenahan. Over there on the keyboard is TJ Shanoff. And one more big round of applause, please, for our guests, Steve Eld and Mark Jacob. Thank you very much.